Hey everybody, we are in Proverbs chapter 11 today, looking at verse 14, which says, "Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors, there is safety." This is an interesting verse for me because I've only ever really heard repeated that second half, "In an abundance of counselors, there is safety," and applied it personally. But if you look at this verse, it's actually applying it on a national level. Let me read it again. "Where there is no guidance, a people falls." So the context here is national. It's even political because the word it uses there is am. It can even mean nation. So you got to picture Solomon, who of course is the king of Israel, giving this proverb in the context of rulership, of the kingdom, that he looks as he sees all these other nations, maybe the petty nations rising and falling, or even large empires and the trouble they have, and him just coming to that conclusion that if you're going to just go headlong and do it your way, you're going to have trouble. That's how nations fall. But if you can have an abundance of counselors, there is safety in that. So what this speaks about primarily, I would say primarily, is humility at a governmental level. Isn't that interesting that even that here is here in the book of Proverbs, that rulers should not just hurry off and do their own thing or reject all wisdom or say no one else knows, we're going to be the head and we're not listening to anybody else anymore. Solomon goes, that's how nations fall. That's how civilizations collapse, is when one nation decides we're not listening to anybody anymore. We're going to go headlong. There's not going to be any guidance. We're not going to let anybody speak to us. And we've seen this happen countless times in history, haven't we? Obviously, you think of guys like Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon, who Nebuchadnezzar built a giant 90-foot golden statue of himself, and Belshazzar was praising the gods of gold and silver with the vessels of the temple, and the Lord came in at the handwriting on the wall, remember? And he was not listening to Daniel, his wise counsel. He was just doing things his own way, and that nation fell. You've seen it countless times through history. When one nation just follows that one charismatic ruler or group, I think of the Nazis, of course, in Germany, where they're not going to be part of anybody's game anymore. It's just all them. Or the Soviet Union, where we're casting off everything that's ever been said, every wisdom that's come before, any ideas, we're throwing it all away. Imperial Japan during World War II, same thing. And of course, to Solomon's son as well. Rehoboam was a rotten king because he became king, and all of his dad's old counselors said, "Rehoboam, if you want the people to love you, reduce the taxes and reduce the forced workload." And Rehoboam says, okay, I'll take that into consideration. Goes to his young buddies, his guys fresh out of their political science degrees or something, and they said, "No, man, you got to show them you're tough. You got to tell them that I'm tougher than my dad ever was, and he might have whipped you with whips. I'm going to whip you with scorpions." And if you know the story from 1 Kings 12, he lost half the kingdom, more than half the kingdom, and that's when the divide happened between him and Jeroboam. He couldn't take advice, advice that he didn't already want to hear. This is how nations fall. No king, no governor or president or mayor or parent and pastor, for that matter, should get to the place where they can't take advice from anybody. This is how nations fall. Solomon himself would write later in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 4, verse 13, "Better was a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice." And that's something. He's like, it would be better for me to be poor and have nothing, to not be able to take any advice, even though I was king of the whole world. But let's apply this personally, because it's obviously not just on a national level. It applies to us too. In an abundance of counselor, there is safety, but where there's no guidance, a person, a family, a church, a city falls. We ought not to be so wrapped up in what we want to do that we can't hear opposing voices. Have you ever been like that before? Don't think about other people now. Think about you. Have you ever been in the place where you wanted to do something, and if anybody told you that was a good idea, you took it to heart and you wrote it down, and it was, oh, this is so wonderful. But anytime anybody contradicted you, blowing them off, block out the haters, right? Then you know what this is like. You know that doesn't lead to a good place. And we're in this weird spot now with the internet and everything else that you can curate who you hear. You can block out people you don't want to hear from. You can block out not just people that you shouldn't be listening to, but folks that you should be listening to, but you don't like what they have to say, so you ignore them. It's not just now I have to leave the church and skip town and not talk to my mom anymore. Now you can just do it all digitally, and you can choose who you listen to. And this is important. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 3, Paul warned us about these days in the church. He said, "The time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions." This is why as in my ministry, in my family, I try to go to what the Word says. What does the Bible say? What did God have to say? And what did the best representatives of God people have to say? You know, not just I'm going to take the Bible and come up with my own weird interpretation, but what did the godly men who have gone before me understand about this? Taking in that wise counsel, finding godly men who know me and can correct me and know where I tend to go wrong and have seen me grow and all the rest. That's where safety is, in an abundance of wise counsel. We as a culture value individualism, we value passion, but we got to temper those things with wisdom, and most importantly, the wisdom that comes from the Word of God. Don't let your own opinions and your own ideas run away with your head, and make sure you have open ears to hear godly advice when it comes. God bless you guys. We'll see you later on.